Welcome back to the WhisperVault, friends. It's great to have you with me again tonight. Life really throws some wild curveballs, right? Sometimes they land you in spots you never saw coming. And that can be a crazy ride. For me, that place was a Civil War-era row house. The landlord practically tossed me the keys, grinning and chatting about character and original features. You could just tell he loved this place. The settling of the timbers, the sighing of the wind, the occasional mournful howl of a stray cat, echoing in the alleyway outside. I'd learned to filter most of it out, to build this wall of normalcy, against that unsettling undercurrent. But then one night, everything flipped upside down. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags waving like tattered battle banners. Not a sudden crash or bang, but the total absence of sound, as if the world outside had just decided to hold its breath. I remember glancing at the cold, impersonal numbers on my digital clock. 2:03 a.m. The room was bathed in this faint, sickly yellow light, the gaslight bleeding through the delicate. A prickle of unease ran down my spine, that familiar sensation of being watched, but this time it was different. Focused. Almost predatory. Original features turned out to mean gaslight fixtures that sighed and flickered like they were about to give up the ghost. Floorboards that cried out with every step, and this constant feeling, this gnawing sense that you were never truly the only one within those walls. I've got a story for you that's a little different, a little personal in a way. Especially after night fell. The gaslight painted these long, swaying shadows that danced with the slightest movement. Every whisper of wind against the ancient window panes sounded like a hushed secret, just beyond the edge of hearing. You could practically taste the history in the air, a thick, musty presence that settled like a shroud over everything. I tried to appreciate the antique charm, the echoes of a time long past, but more often than not, it just felt cold, downright unsettling. A place where the silence held more secrets than any shout. It asks about a time I lived in a house that felt like it was breathing with the ghosts of yesterday. This is the story of the old row house. It wasn't a choice, really, more of a necessity. There was a certain atmosphere to that house, I'll give it that much. I am not the type to be easily spooked by jump scares, or things that go bump in the night. The truly chilling stuff, the horror that burrows under your skin and stays with you. The faint whisper of your name on a wind that isn't there. The way the silence can suddenly become so heavy, so thick with something you can't quite place, that it feels almost tangible. That was the specialty of this particular house. For a while, it was just the usual old house noises. It was the kind of deep, absolute silence that pulls you awake. Slowly, cautiously, I turned my head towards the foot of the bed, the steady thump of my heart growing louder in the silence, and that's when I saw her. She was just standing there, perfectly still. A dark shape silhouetted against the dim, yellowish glow. But I was completely locked down, frozen solid by a primal terror I'd never experienced before. Her face, it was pale, almost translucent, and her features were sharp, defined by a profound. And her eyes. Those eyes were dark, deep, bottomless pools that seemed to suck all the light out of the room. They were locked on me. She slowly, deliberately, brought a finger to her lips. A silent, unmistakable gesture. A woman, tall and slender, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned gown, the kind you only ever see in faded photographs from the 1800s. Like flipping a switch, but more like a gentle whisper. One moment she was there, a spectral figure in my bedroom, and the next, she was gone, vanished into the very fabric of the house, leaving only the lingering chill in the air. Her shape shimmered and rippled at the edges, becoming less and less clear until she was almost completely invisible. The silence in the room felt different now, heavier, charged with something I couldn't even begin to understand. Every creak of the old floorboards, every flicker of the dying gaslight, sent fresh shivers racing down my spine. I kept replaying the image of her in my mind, that pale, sorrowful face, those deep, dark eyes, that silent, what did it all mean? Why was she there? And why in God's name had she gone through the wall? Finally, I managed to push myself up, my legs weak and trembling beneath the covers. I tried my best to rationalize what I had seen. A vivid dream, the result of stress and exhaustion. My imagination running wild in this old, undeniably spooky house. But it had felt so real, so tangible. The memory of her pale hand hovering just above my chest. A fresh wave of chills rippling through me every time I dared to think about it. I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, the sudden, harsh burst of warm light doing little to dispel the icy dread that had settled deep within me. And then, she just floated, not across the room to the door, or in any normal way, but straight towards the wall that separated my bedroom from the house next door. The fabric was a deep, almost charcoal gray, and it seemed to cling to her form like a second skin. It was like staring at a life-sized painting that had somehow, impossibly, come to life. A ghost plucked straight from the dusty pages of history and placed right there, at the foot of my bed. Her hair was piled high on her head, dark and severe, a stark contrast to the paleness of her skin. My breath hitched in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to shout, to bolt from the bed. She didn't move, didn't utter a single sound. It was that utter stillness that was so deeply unsettling, so profoundly unnatural. Then, slowly, with a deliberate grace, she raised one hand. It was pale and thin, the fingers long and delicate, almost skeletal in the dim light. She brought it to her chest, then gently pressed it against the air, right over where my own heart was, hammering a desperate rhythm against my ribcage. And then she did something even stranger, something that sent a fresh wave of icy dread washing over me. The silence in the room became almost unbearable, a thick, suffocating blanket. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared at her, my mind spinning, desperately trying to find some logical explanation for the impossible scene unfolding before me. Then, as if she were just smoke and shadow, she started to fade away. She passed right through it. No sound, no resistance whatsoever. I lay there, completely paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. My heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of that night. The next day I was a complete and utter wreck. That evening, as I finally managed to force myself out of the house to grab some much-needed coffee, I ran into Mr. Henderson, my neighbor on the other side, the side where the ghostly figure had disappeared. He was meticulously tending to his small front garden, a kind, elderly man who always had a friendly smile and a wave for everyone. "Evening," he said, his smile today looking a little forced. "Mr. Henderson, good evening," I replied, trying my best to sound normal. But the tremor in my voice probably gave away my complete lack of sleep. "Rather odd happened here last night." He hesitated for a moment, fiddling with a rose bush, then looked up at me with a worried frown creasing his brow. "Odd?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trying desperately to keep it steady. My heart did this weird little flutter in my chest, a premonition of what was to come. Dressed in, well, old-fashioned clothes. Dark dress, her hair all done up in some kind of style I haven't seen in years. She was just standing there, perfectly still, looking straight towards my house. Gave me the creeps. Around 2 a.m, I woke up. Couldn't rightly say why, just this. Feeling it hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been my overactive imagination. We had both seen the same spectral figure. And when I looked out my back window, towards the alley, the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets hidden in the overgrown bushes. The realization that we had both witnessed the same impossible event was both deeply terrifying and validating. I wasn't going crazy, at least not alone. I saw her too, in my bedroom. She came through the wall from your side. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice trembling slightly, betraying the fear that was still clinging to me. Did she put her hand to her chest and then make a she gesture? He paused, a genuinely perplexed look in his eyes. I saw a woman standing in my backyard. Yes, he said, leaning heavily on his gardening trowel. My breath hitched in my throat. A woman? I repeated, the word feeling thin and reedy on my tongue. Yes, he confirmed, nodding slowly, his gaze distant. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the world around me suddenly feeling a little tilted. His eyes widened in genuine surprise, the worry on his face replaced by astonishment. How on earth did you know that? A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice now barely a whisper, the implications of what we'd both seen sinking in like a stone. We stood there for a long, silent moment, the twilight deepening around us. The next day, I was driven by a restless energy, a desperate need to understand. I had to find answers. I spent hours lost in the hushed halls of the local library, then moved on to the dusty archives of the Historical Society. I devoured old town records, newspaper clippings, anything I could find about the history of our neighborhood, of those old, interconnected row houses. The resemblance was chilling, undeniable. The woman in the picture, with her severe, pulled-back hairstyle and those deep, intensely sad eyes. The articles painted a portrait of a life marked by tragedy. Eleanor had apparently worn a locket, a cherished gift from her beloved husband before he went off to war. Engraved with her initials, I felt this strange, unexpected connection to Eleanor. A deep sense of pity for her lonely. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had to have it. I went to a small, dusty antique shop tucked away on a quiet side street, a place crammed floor to ceiling with forgotten relics of the past. After hesitantly explaining my interest in items from the Civil War era, the elderly owner, with a knowing glint in his eye, showed me a small, tarnished. It was heavy in my hand, cold and smooth, and when I carefully opened it, there, intricately engraved in delicate script, were the initials. She had been married to a captain in the Union Army, a man who, like so many others, never returned from the brutal conflict. She had lived in this very house, year after year, waiting for news that tragically never came. Her health slowly and steadily failing under the weight of her grief. The records stated she finally passed away in the house. In the bitter winter of 1868, heartbroken and completely alone. The house I lived in, it had a name once, back in the 1800s. It was part of a larger estate. I painstakingly traced the ownership back through the decades, through faded ledgers and brittle documents, until I finally found a family name, Whitmore. And that's where I found her. Eleanor Whitmore. She didn't seem malevolent, not angry or vengeful. Just trapped, stuck in some endless loop of grief and longing, perhaps still waiting for a message that would never arrive. The she gesture. Was she trying to communicate something specific? Or was she simply trying to silence my fear, knowing, somehow, that she meant no harm? Old newspaper clippings, faded sepia-toned photographs. The more I read, the more a profound sense of melancholy settled over me. As I delved deeper into the old records, I found a small, almost insignificant mention in a personal letter. That evening, driven by an impulse I didn't fully understand, I decided to do something. A sudden wave of emotion washed over me, a strange mix of sadness and certainty. Back at the house, under the flickering glow of the gaslight, I carefully cleaned the locket, a small, forgotten treasure brought back into the light. Then, I walked into my living room and placed it on the mantelpiece, right above the old, cold fireplace, a place where countless fires had likely burned in the past. It just felt like the right thing to do. A small gesture of remembrance. A tiny acknowledgement for a woman who had been so thoroughly forgotten by the relentless march of time. A few nights passed. The old house remained its usual, creaky, shadowy self, but I hadn't seen Eleanor again. But tonight, something was undeniably different. Her posture wasn't as rigid, her shoulders not as slumped with the weight of unending grief. I finally understood her sadness, her enduring longing. There was a softness about her, a subtle hint of something. I followed her line of sight and realized she was looking towards the mantelpiece, towards the small, silver locket that now rested there. It was a sad, sweet curve that softened the sharp angles of her face. A transformation that made her appear beautiful. It was the very first sign of any kind of peace I had witnessed in her spectral form. Else something almost serene. I started to wonder if my late-night research, if the presence of the locket on the mantel, had somehow brought her a measure of peace. Perhaps she had finally found the message she had been waiting for all these years. Or perhaps the simple act of acknowledging her existence, of remembering her, had been enough to quiet her restless spirit. I simply looked back at her, trying with all my being to convey understanding, compassion, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. Then, one particularly still night, the kind of night where the silence hums in your ears. This time, it wasn't to a sudden absence of sound, but to a profound. I looked towards the foot of the bed, my heart no longer hammering with sheer terror, but with a strange, hesitant mix of apprehension, yes, even hope. Only a deep, unwavering sense of empathy. She was there. Eleanor. Just as I remembered her from that first terrifying night. The pale, sorrowful face, the dark, flowing gown. She looked directly at me, and for the first time since our encounters began, I felt no real fear. Slowly, I sat up in bed, pulling the covers around me. Her gaze slowly drifted from me, across the dimly lit room, towards the doorway that led to the living room. A faint smile, a truly gentle smile, touched her lips. She raised her hand again, not to her chest this time, but towards the locket. Her translucent fingers seemed to reach for it, to almost touch it, without ever quite making physical contact. They held a profound gratitude. It wasn't a ripple, a distortion of her form. It was a gentle, almost peaceful dissipation, like a morning mist, slowly dissolving in the warmth of the rising sun. She didn't float through the wall this time. She simply faded away, her image becoming less and less defined, less substantial, until she was no longer there. The shadows still danced with the flickering gaslight. The floorboards still whisper their ancient stories. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Have you ever experienced anything similar in an old house? I'm always curious to hear your stories, but now, when the wind sighs through the old window panes, it doesn't sound like a whispered secret, a plea for help. It sounds, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, so you don't miss out on future tales. Thanks for spending your time with me tonight. Until next time, sleep tight, like a gentle sigh of relief. Just a faint shimmer in the air, and then nothing. A silent, heartfelt thank you that resonated deep within me. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere that had clung to it since my first encounter, the palpable weight of sorrow, replaced by a profound sense of quiet peace. The old house still groaned inside, the gaslight still flickered with its unreliable rhythm. But the mournful cries I had once imagined hearing in the creaking floorboards seemed to have softened, replaced by a gentler. The lingering sadness was still there, a faint shadow in their depths. But it was now undeniably tinged with a sense of acceptance, of finally finding some measure of release. Slowly, gracefully, she began to fade again, but this time, it was different from that first terrifying night. The room felt different. I got out of bed and walked into the living room. The silver locket gleamed softly on the mantelpiece in the dim light, a small, tangible link to a woman who had lived and loved and lost within these very walls. I picked it up, the aged metal still cool against my palm. I didn't know for certain if Eleanor was truly gone, if she had finally found the peace that had eluded her for so long and moved on to whatever comes next. But the feeling in the house had undeniably shifted. The screaming silence had been replaced by a comforting quiet. Just a little slice of my life. You know, it's wild how the past can feel so close sometimes. Right, it really hits home. I still live in the old row house. Get ready for some mind-blowing surprises ahead. That's it. If you loved diving into the mysterious world of the WhisperVault, you're totally in for a super exciting treat.